And we're live. This is sort of the substitute show for Catch and Counter this week. Um, just wanted to get on the air real quick and talk about some of the fights this weekend. There was a lot of surprises, I would say, this weekend. The main surprise being Matias and Paro. But let's get initial reactions, at least from you, Jack, to Tank Davis getting an eighth round knockout over Frank Martin.
For that even too, I know that I kind of coined a phrase on our platform, dog watch. I know Ray's enjoyed it a lot too, but this was the kind of weekend that like our dog watch fans live for. I mean, saw some good upsets in there and some good competitive fights. So, as you said, kind of substituting for catch and counter this week. Our guy Nibs is not on. Me and him are gonna do a show probably later on this week, but without him, it ain't a catch and counter. So without the other guys on with you, it's not the shop. So we kind of did our own thing, fitting in where we can fit in, but I thought Tank looked really really good. I thought that you can argue this is the best that he's looked. I just thought he answered any questions that we might have had about him. And shout out to Jesus also in the chat as always holding it down for us. But we want to see how Tank dealt with the guy who had athleticism, a guy who could had hand speed but also the foot speed. He's been fighting a lot of guys recently who didn't. They might have had quick hands, but he was able to track them down with the footwork. And we want to see how a guy like Martin, if Martin got going in the early rounds, was Tank going to be able to close the distance and get him out of there? And that's eventually what he was able to do. The crazy thing with Tank is that each round he was in there with Frank, it felt like in any time Tank's in a fight, it feels like the ring gets shorter. Or I mean, gets smaller each round he's in there. It just felt like Frank spent a lot more time up on the ropes, and I guess a lot of people are saying just about how well, Frank shouldn't have been up on the ropes, and that's a lot easier said than done when you're in there against a guy like Tank Davis, and I think that's just Tank's specialty in being able to kind of make you feel claustrophobic and kind of really close in on you, and that's exactly what he did.
Yeah, it's interesting. I thought Frank did a really great job of boxing, of standing his ground in certain moments and letting go of combinations and trying to get some level of respect. But like you said, Jack, like it always just feels imminent. It always just feels like it's only a matter of time before Tank is able to figure you out and just sort of make that ring really small and put you in a position where he's going to hit you with whatever he wants. And at least at this point in his career, he has always found a way to do that. And I think that there's an argument to be made that Frank is probably the biggest, best fighter he's been in with potentially. At least in context of when he fought him and at what weight he fought them at. And it's hard to argue, that he's the guy at lightweight of the moment. There's still those 50-50 fights kind of missing from his resume. And so when we're talking about him as a pound for pound fighter, that's more so what we're talking about, right? He's now a pay-per-view pound for pound star. So the bar shifts once you become that guy. And since he's been that guy, we're not necessarily getting those types of matchups.
Yeah, for sure. But I do think, and I would say that he is the guy at lightweight right now, and I do think we're gonna get those fights. I think sooner rather than later. I think there's more optimism now than there was before. Seems like they're gonna make the Lomachenko fight next, and I'm just gonna say that I ain't mad at that fight at all. A lot of people saying that Lomachenko, even as Jesus saying there that Lomachenko is older. I wouldn't even say he's on his way out though, because I mean Usyk is older, Crawford is older, Canelo fight wise is older, Lomachenko's older, but it's not like any of those guys are really towards the end of their careers yet. I think Loma is just like those guys. Where we just seen him against Kambosos, he looked real good. A lot of people thought he beat Devin when they fought, so this could be the undisputed champion if a few rounds go a bunch of different ways. So I really like that fight, and I hope it is next. And I just think that Tank is. It's hard for me to just like it's hard for me to say that Tank definitely or those guys definitely beat Tank. It's hard for me to say that those guys or he can beat. It's hard for me to say he definitely beats those guys, but it's hard for me to say that those guys can last 12 rounds with him. A guy like Shakur and Loma, they do both have great feet, but I just think Tank's ability to kind of, as I said, kind of make the ring feel smaller and smaller each round. And it's not a case of if he's gonna hit you; it's about when he's gonna hit you. And it's the thing where power doesn't. I think power can get overrated sometimes in boxing. Don't get me wrong. I think that it can be used as kind of a crutch to like, oh, if this guy lands this, then something can happen. But Tank doesn't get enough
Or
credit
or
for
it
his.
can mask really glaring
Mhm.
pause in your game,
Yeah.
like
Hmm.
Wilder
But I
or
think that Tank is close enough to those guys or anybody in skills, and I think you could argue just that he's got A-level skills too without the power. So I think that his powers isn't what gets him to the world level. It can be what the difference is between him and all the other guys who have the A or A plus level skills.
Yeah, listen, like you said, man, the boxing is kind of it's a little different how age is factored in than it was when I first started watching boxing, right? Roy Jones was in his mid 30s and had already sort of hit this wall athletically, and he wasn't the same guy after he moved up to heavyweight and da 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 da. You know, a lot of these guys who have longer amateur careers who time out their fights a little different. They're not fighting 12 times a year when they first go pro. It's just a little bit what it means to be 37 years old in boxing now is not necessarily the same thing. Now, I do think Lomachenko is a step back from where he was at his absolute peak. But those are the kinds of fights that we want to see Tank in, right? If it's not going to be Shakur and it's at lightweight, it sort of has to be Lomachenko. And I think once, if and when he does beat Lomachenko, now there's really no one else left in the room, and I think it leads to a showdown with Shakur, hopefully. Um, that's all we can hope. Miles Austin asking, do you think Frank Wade affected him in a negative way? Listen, bro, I cannot stand weight cuts, bro. And I've been saying it forever. Like, I know that there is a certain amount of, getting to the lowest weight possible where you can perform. But the ultimate is, can you perform? And so when I see guys at weigh-ins look like, we actually talked about it off air before the fight. I was like, bro, these guys are looking a little rough, man. And they were, man. And so it's hard for me to imagine. We just know scientifically you're not going to take punches as well at that level of dehydration. So I think it's inevitable.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Miles Austin. I think that's a good comment too, where I think that was that the difference in the fight? No, because I think Tank was just setting up shots and stylistically was having his way, but clearly, as you said, punch resistance is never going to be at its best when you get kind of draining yourself down. Shout out to Nibs always, as he said, Happy Father's Day to everybody in the ITR family, anybody who supports us, anybody who doesn't support us but still watches us because you're still supporting us at the end of the day, but to all you guys, and shout out to Nibs and his family as well. Hope everything is well with you guys, and just hope you're enjoying your time with your family today, also, Nibs. And we'll get back at it next week. So I know everyone's interested in that. So don't worry, we got you guys coming up real soon.
What do you think about this, Jack, that De Los Santos is a legit opponent for Tank? I think that there's actually some truth to that, ironically, because if you can make Shakur or you can mute all of Shakur's offense in some way, right? He is responsible as well for how that fight looked. It is a style we haven't really seen Tank in with.
Well, it is, and I think a lot of the questions I would have about which I wouldn't mind the fight. I mean, if they made it next, I wouldn't be happy with it just because, like you said, if he's gonna fight a southpaw, we'd rather it be Shakur or Loma. Obviously, even if Williams or Peter, I'd rather see than De Los Santos. I see De Los Santos, a guy who I've always still liked a lot. I wasn't against when Shakur fought him, because I thought it was a pretty good. I thought he beat Ryo in the knockout, so I thought that was a good fight because he showed good boxing skills against Adorno too. But I think he's more in that Frank Martin level where still, I mean, these guys are world class guys. They're still top 10 lightweights. Arguably, Frank Martin, I think you could still say is a number 5 lightweight in the world, maybe. But I think that the later you get in the fight, I think Tank will start to kind of figure him out. But eventually, I wouldn't be against that if he gets another good win or two. But I think that right now, that's not the fight that I'd be looking for. But stylistically, I can see why it would intrigue some people.
I think it's more than interesting. I think it's a good matchup. Again, like you said, Jack, he's at a point in his career where high level B sides are just not going to cut it. He really does need somebody else who can bring something to the table and make a mega fight like the Ryan fight. But we just want more of that. We want more of it against guys who are established in their prime. I don't think that's a lot to ask. When you look at all the other greats, they have those kinds of fights. And for whatever reason, or I should say Tank does get a little bit of a pass on that, on skipping some steps. Even though I have him on my pound for pound list off of eye test, it's hard for me to put him in the top 5, in the top 3 when, compare his resume up against any of those guys. And I don't think it's even close.
Yeah, not against the top guys like I used to like the Usyks, the Crawford, Canelos, in a ways, those guys' resumes. But one thing I will say is I think Tank's resume does get underrated at times too. Now, does he have the A plus level wins that I think we want out of him? No, but I think his resume gets undervalued sometimes too when you go back and look at a guy
Sure.
like Frank Martin, a very athletic guy. I mean, in hindsight, now we see how he dealt with it, but a lot of people before the fight were wondering, okay, he's fighting an American who's athletic, who can hit, who can kind of box and move too, who's got a good trainer. So there were a lot of questions about that going in. I mean, Ryan, I know there's questions about the weight, but the Ryan Garcia age win has clearly aged well, and we got to see what comes up with all that because there's clearly an asterisk next to Ryan's win against Devin. But the Isak Cruz win is clearly aged well too. I was impressed with the Barrios win. Leo Santa Cruz, smaller guy, but it's the way he beat Leo Santa Cruz, and he's beat Pedraza too. So I think he's got a better resume than people give him credit for too. Which even if he hasn't given us the fights that we want and the fights that I do think we're gonna see next, I don't think he's not giving us great fights either. I think like bang for your buck wise, since I've been paying attention, I think he's given us some great
He's
fights and
got
great moments also.
multiple, yeah, he's got multiple sort of like B plus, A minus level wins. And I think now that he's a pay per view star, it's time to step up into another category. And he's been a pay per view star for a number of years. And so I think even at that, it's going to be a little bit delayed. You know, when he was fighting Leo Santa Cruz, he should have been fighting another guy at their best at 130, but that wasn't the fight of the moment, but it was a solid B plus type of win. You know what I mean? And I just think the more of a star he becomes, the expectations are naturally going to change. I want to see Tank versus Matias, Raymond Morataya, Shakur, De Los Santos, Jose Ramirez, Loma. He's a guy with options, bro. So if he wants to take the Canelo route and jump right into that pool of 15 killers at 140, I'm all for it. You know, it's just a matter of if he's going to stay at lightweight. There's really only a handful of fights that I'm interested in. By the way, Morataya, I think, would be one of them.
Yeah, I think Morataya is the guy who I'm interested in. I think he's fighting Tevin Farmer coming up, which I know Farmer's been inactive and he's a smaller guy, but I'm interested to see kind of how that fight plays out too. But as far as Tank's concerned, I do think it's going to be Loma next, even maybe Shakur after that. But I think if he were to go to 140, it would probably be an Isak Cruz rematch with. At the time, I wasn't psyched about that, but hey, I mean, if it's, I'd rather the fight's at 135. But if he's going to go to 40, fight Isak Cruz for a real belt at 140, especially the momentum that Cruz has built up, I mean, I ain't going to be mad at that either. I want a little bit more, but I'd be okay with that fight being next if we're looking at a bigger fight coming up also. But I think, as you said, the time is now for him to make the big fights. I've always viewed him as a pound for pound guy. I think there's a good chance he beats all these guys out here too. So I think now is the time, and it's the perfect time because I think he's always been a great fighter, but I think he's really in the middle of his prime right now, and I think that it's going to be hard for any of these dudes to last 12 rounds in there with him because, as I said, he's clearly got the power, but he's never gotten enough credit for the boxing skills. But I think that kind of showed against Frank Martin too, where you just saw that once he gets going, it's really hard to kind of get him back out of that rhythm. So it's almost like how long can you hold them off before the onslaught eventually comes?
How do you think about this? Where Shakur is obviously the number two guy at the weight, right? I think not in terms of achievement, but in terms of skill, eye test, all those things. But his style, as we even see in our comment section right now, doesn't necessarily get a lot of fans, even diehard fans, to call for the fight. You know, there's a part of that I get. So how do we as fans and as analysts and as guys who are on the show right now, how do we say to a fan like, yeah, it's ugly, but it is the best fight out there for him, when a lot of people are like, well, I don't want to see that shit.
I think that's the bottom line is that a lot of people don't give a fuck at the end of the day. Which, and we've seen that with boxing with other guys. A guy might have great skills. A Guillermo Rigondeaux, one of my favorite all-time fighters, another guy who you've always loved too. Most people have never even heard of him still. They don't know how good he was just because outside of the hardcore fans, it never had that trickle-down effect to the casuals. I think Shakur is a much bigger name, so people, his name's kind of getting out there, but it might not be for the right reasons at those times. I mean, I still think Shakur is a hell of a fighter, and I think the answer to why you'd want to watch that fight still, why I'm intrigued by that fight, is that I still want to see those answers to see, okay, how does Tank deal with a guy like that? Because maybe Shakur does outbox him. Maybe just because he does master that distance. My number one thing about Shakur is that he's a master at distance. And right on time, Jesus. I definitely don't think he's unbeatable. I was saying that I have a hard, I could see why people would have a hard time seeing. Even I have a hard time seeing guys being able to last 12 rounds, but I also have a hard time seeing it on the flip effect of him just going in there and wiping a guy like Shakur out, wiping a guy like Loma out too. So I think that I might favor Tank in all of those fights, but as I just said, I wouldn't be shocked if Shakur just mastered that distance and was able to kind of pot shot and beat Tank for 12 rounds too. I think it's a lot easier said than done though at the end of the day.
It's all a lot easier said than done. It's hard for me to imagine somebody imposing themselves on Shakur for 12 rounds. It's hard for me to see any of these young guys, even as good as they are, any one of them dominating Lomachenko in one fashion or another. It's like every time he's had one of these step ups with one of these big young guys, he shows up, even if they've been close losses or wins or whatever. He always shows up. So I think that it's a real litmus test for Tank's level. How do you handle somebody as versatile as Lomachenko, as Shakur? But I think the reason for it to be Shakur right now, as much as I want to see Lomachenko get that opportunity, like that fight's not going to be relevant forever. And I think that they're both going to be changing weight classes. It just feels like it's one of those moments where it's just too obvious.
No, I agree. I would love that fight. And I think that Tank and them can look at the De Los Santos fight and say, okay, we just kind of not that Frank Martin and De Los Santos, neither one of those guys are Shakur. Obviously, they all have different styles. Shakur masters distance and range way better than those guys. He's been boxing longer than all those guys. Those guys have more power, so none of them are the same kind of fighters. But they can say, okay, look how we dealt with the guy on Frank Martin, who is a southpaw, who is athletic, who does have good feet. And they could maybe look at the De Los Santos fight and say, okay, look, when they were able to make Shakur uncomfortable in there, De Los Santos was able to do it, but wasn't able to let his hands go as much as he wanted to. And we have that much more boxing ability and that much more boxing IQ in there. Not that De Los Santos doesn't have skills, but Tank is clearly that next level of skills. I think they could look at that fight and look at that and kind of use that if they were to fight him. Just as Shakur can look at some of the things Tank does in the early rounds and say, okay, if we're able to keep him at bay for longer, maybe we can't be the one to kind of just never let him really get going.
Listen, Damon, you got a good point. Shakur needs to fight Loma. He needs to fight Kambosos. He needs to fight those type of fighters. I think that there's some truth to what you're saying. I think it's just been challenging for him to get those kinds of guys in the ring with him as well. I think that that's an obstacle that is going to continue to persist for him until he himself is a star. And so, listen, I think the winner of Loma and Shakur fighting Tank is a way bigger fight. I couldn't agree more.
That's what I was gonna say too. Is I like that because shit, in a perfect world, we would have already seen Shakur fight a guy like William Zepeda. When that fight, when Zepeda turned it down, that could have been for the vacant title, and then Shakur could have fought Loma in a unification, and then we would have seen them against Tank for basically the champion of the division. So it's not going to turn out that way, but I think clearly, as you said, that would have been the perfect plan. And it doesn't always turn out that way. And at this point, I'm just happy for any of those possible options being made. It seems like in boxing, we're starting to get a lot more of what we do want to see too. Before it used to just be a pipe dream of, yeah, we'd like to see Tank and Loma, but it ain't going to happen. Or yeah, we'd love to see Tank and Shakur, but it ain't going to happen. At this point, it clearly seems like those options are a lot more realistic. And I do think we get at least one of those fights at the end of this year, and it's looking like it's part of the Loma fight.
Any last thoughts on this one before we move on to Benavidez and Gvozdyk, which was another hell of a fight?
Yeah, I mean, just that. I want to give Tank credit for showing up too. I mean, Frank credit for showing up. I think that obviously it ain't the result that he wanted, but I do think that he showed class in this fight. I think he did show up to fight, and he showed that he is a world class level guy, and he showed that his skills in there are still going to be problems for a lot of these guys. And we've seen, as I mentioned, a lot of Tank's wins age well. But the Isaac Cruz one, especially the Barrios one as of recently, and the Garcia one, we'll see what happens with that. But I can see Frank Martin same kind of way because he's got less experience than those guys do. Is really using this as a learning experience and becoming a much better fighter because of this. And also, I thought the scorecards were right out of on the money. I saw seen a lot of talk about the scorecards, people having issues with them, but they gave Frank the first 3 rounds and Tank the last 4 rounds. And I thought it was a pretty easy fight to score. I thought that was right on the money. I had no problem with Tank being up a point at the time of the stoppage, and I just thought just that after round 3 he kind of took control over that. So I don't see any We got a lot of problem with other cards. Don't get me wrong on this night, but I don't think there are any complaints and any reason to bitch about those cards.
I I personally had Frank up. I think 5-2 or 4-3, but there was close rounds in there. It just, especially early, it felt like Frank Martin was doing a good job of putting combinations together and mixing it with speed and putting a little zip on him when he needed to. You could actually see Calvin Ford in the corner in moments had a certain level of urgency. He comes back after the sixth or seventh. He goes, "We need all these rounds." You know what I mean? So they knew that they were in a real fight, I think.
No, 100% they were, and I think that you saw that just with even the whole week. And Tank will laugh and joke sometimes, obviously, and kind of sell the fight, but I think they knew that they were kind of in there with the real one. I think it showed that even in a losing effort, Frank Martin, like I said, he showed a lot, and that dude's going to be back. And I think there's a lot of people love to kind of shit on a guy once he picks up a loss, this and that, but he's going to be better, much better because of this. It wouldn't be the first guy to lose in their first title fight, get knocked out, and then go on to have a hell of a career. So.
One too many trips to the ropes, right? Sometimes that's all that it takes. That we may or may not agree on that. We'll talk about some controversial scorecards that, in certain cases. But let's start with David Benavidez and Alexander Gvozdyk. Listen, to me, this is a great win when you debut in your first time in a weight class. You fight maybe the third to fifth best guy in the weight. You win most of the rounds. You have injuries coming in. You make it work. It doesn't seem like fans as a whole are happy with or impressed with the performance, but I think that there's maybe a little context lacking in that there is value in beating a top guy and having to overcome challenges to do that. And that's just sort of what happens when you fight the best guys.
Yeah, and I think because I've seen Benavidez get a lot of criticism for this performance, but I think that kind of comes down to is what your opinion on Gvozdyk was going into this fight. I think we both looked at this, even when it was announced as a really intriguing fight. Gvozdyk was, I know it was years ago now, but he was the lineal number one light heavyweight champ of the world once he knocked out Adonis Stevenson. He lost to Beterbiev, but he was winning that fight until he got stopped and gave Beterbiev the best fight of his career. And I mean, shit, the dude looked ready to go. You just saw he was cut up. He looked in probably the best shape of his, not even probably, definitely the best shape of his whole career. So I think those few years off, if anything, helped him just kind of mentally refocus and physically was able to build himself back up again. But I liked what I saw from Benavidez in there. I mean, would you have wanted to see a stoppage? I mean, I think anybody would like to see a stoppage if you have an opportunity for it. But I thought he was able to work on a lot of things in there. Not that he treated it like a sparring session, but I think once he knew he had him, he was able to work on some things. I did like the head movement. I saw the ability to switch stances and kind of cut off the ring. I liked in there too, but I think it was more of Gvozdyk not letting Benavidez break him down more than it was a lack of Benavidez being able to break Gvozdyk down. Because I still thought, and a lot of the criticism of David too has been just that he's beating up these smaller guys. Like he looked good against Boo Boo, but Boo Boo was a 154 pounder before and all these things. And we seen him in there against Gvozdyk, who was a bigger guy, who was taller and looked naturally and bigger in there too. And David showed that his skills can carry and be the difference against a world class level boxer, former
And by the
champion,
way,
former
Gvozdyk
Olympian.
did land some hard shots on David, and David was never shook. He was never hurt. He took the power really well. He wasn't fighting a feather fist, right? He was fighting a guy who's got some pop. So at least for me, he showed all the signs that he has the makings of a top level light heavyweight, almost, especially because it wasn't an easy fight, especially because he's fighting a guy that was maybe a little bigger than him and maybe just as strong as him and had good hand speed and had good defense and wanted to win. You check a lot of boxes when you beat a guy like that. And I think kudos to Gvozdyk for being able to, win rounds late in a fight that he was clearly way behind on, and he didn't really give up on trying to find it.
Yeah, and I think him coming in the shape he came in allowed him to kind of survive because it's not like David wasn't hitting him with shots. It's not even like people look at all David's power wasn't hitting the same at 175. But obviously he's fighting bigger guys, but I think his power was still a big impact in the fight. Put it this way, if he didn't have any power, Gvozdyk would have let his hands go a lot more early on in that fight too. And I just think that's something that didn't get talked about enough. Just the power, even if he didn't lean Gvozdyk or knock him out or knock him down, I think the power was still very evident in that fight. And I think that
And
we
David's
saw that.
never really been like a one punch guy. He has a
Hmm.
couple of those, but really he's an accumulation type of guy.
Hmm.
He's fighting a guy that has good defense, that knows how to adjust, and that has fought other huge punchers. He's fought Adonis Stevenson. He's fought Arthur Beterbiev. He's been in with guys that are legitimate, like generational punchers,
Hmm.
and he made it through. Other than Beterbiev, but he made it through a lot of rounds. So I don't know. I think it's a great win for David. Um, I think him fighting the winner of Bivol and Beterbiev is tremendous. I don't really understand him leaving the window open to go back to 68. I just don't. I don't even see the fights for him that excite me, and especially in light of David Morrell now moving up to 175 to fight Hot Rod, which is a good fight. I'm not sure what's next for him other than fighting the winner of Bivol and Beterbiev, which seems like kind of the crown jewel of that weight neighborhood if you're not going to fight Canelo.
Yeah, and I think the caveat would be the only reason he's leaving the door open is for the Canelo fight. I think that he's waiting to see, okay, probably not going to happen, but even I think for him it wouldn't be a great idea because he'd been draining himself for so long to get down to 68. You finally let your body kind of breathe a little bit. You can exhale because you move back, move up to 75. And I don't think it's a great idea then to cut back down to 68. Would he do it for the money? There's a price on all those things, so I'm sure he would. But I think at this point for his career, it would be much better to stay at 75 because he'll be so much healthier at 175. And even going for Gvozdyk too, I do see what Jesus is saying a bit about. I do think Gvozdyk was bothered by Benavidez punches, but I do think that something I said to you too is that Gvozdyk was throwing a lot more of kind of just get off me punches, and I think that's the credit to David's his power, but also David's ability to kind of move a bit with his head movement and his footwork also, and that kind of Gvozdyk knowing he can't really load up on any shots also
I think he started sitting down a little more the last four rounds.
later on.
Up
Hmm.
until that point, when he was throwing, I think he was just trying to get his range because that was another thing I
Hmm.
thought Benavidez's defense was pretty solid in this fight because he's fighting a guy that has fast hands. Listen, I think it's if you think it's just an okay performance, it's hard to disagree with that. I just contextualize that this is a top five guy in his weight and he won most of the rounds. So I think that you know what I mean. I just think that that's a good metric. It's maybe
Yeah,
not electrifying, but it shows that even when he's a little compromised, he can get the job done.
yeah. I mean, put it this way: would you, besides Bivol and Beterbiev, would you pick any other light heavyweight to beat Gvozdyk right now? I mean, like I like Joshua Buatsi, I like Anthony Yard and those guys, but I don't think I can say I definitely picked those guys to beat this version of Gvozdyk right now. So I do think that you fought the third best guy in the division, if you count David now in the division, the fourth best guy. And it is kind of funny the way people look at performances because I think David might have, and this is probably more the casual fans, not us talking, or not anybody really in our chat right now, but I think more people would have been maybe impressed with the performance. Let's say David had lost the first 5 rounds and then really beat down Gvozdyk and then stopped him in about round 8 or 9. Some people would have liked that performance more, but to me, I was impressed at his ability to control the majority of the rounds in there against a guy like Gvozdyk. When we know, I mean, we know that David is the Mexican monster, and being able to see him control a lot of rounds against a guy in Gvozdyk who's made a career out of controlling rounds and mastering distance and stuff like that. That's something I was impressed on. So I liked his performance in winning probably 10 out of the 12 rounds, 9 of the 12, 11 out of the 12 rounds in that both versus losing a bunch of rounds early on and then stopping him later in the fight.
Yeah, or fighting a guy that was, ranked 25 and stopping him in the first round, like I think that there's a type of fan that's going to go, "Oh wow, holy shit, look at this. This is way more impressive." But I think in terms of real merit and preparing yourself for other top level guys, this was a good fight for him. And also let's keep in mind that he's 27. So he's still got a certain level of like growing into himself as a fighter that's happening right now.
That's a fact. And just like we seen a better version of him, we saw a better version of him against Andrade because he got the 12 rounds in with Plant right before that. So we're gonna see if just think about the better version. We're gonna see if David is next time out, just because he went the 12 rounds with Gvozdyk against a bigger guy. And that's what I think it is too, just a learning experience at the end of the day. And they always say it's always better to learn and a win, especially a convincing win like this, than it is to learning a loss. So hats off to David Benavidez and hats off to Gvozdyk too, because he really came to fight. People were wondering if he was kind of just coming for a check and kind of packing it in, but he didn't do that. Especially he showed that later on in the fight. And if he wants to keep fighting, I think he could beat most of these other guys at 175.
And if we're doing hats off to the fucking comment section right now. You guys are really, you're in the building tonight, and we appreciate it. Initial reaction to Albert Puello getting, I guess, an upset decision over Gary Antoine Russell.
Yeah, so first of all, it was good to see Gary back in the ring. I guess to see both guys back in the ring. I mean, the Russells have been inactive, but I've always been a fan of them just because their family story has always been pretty cool. You had
And they're
their
from the
pops,
Bronx.
yeah, the pops who passed away. It was maybe last year now at this point, but what do you have? Five sons, and they were all national Golden Glove winners or something like that. Just like a stat that you're never gonna see again. The three that turned pro, you got Gary Jr., who obviously was a featherweight champ for a long time. Gary Antonio, who's been a good contender, and then Gary Antoine, who's now the guy coming up and who's always had good skills. He beat Boots in the Olympic trials, so we knew how good Gary Antoine was. But this was a tough fight to put him in with. In his, as Adam Hurley says, they're all named Gary too. They're all Gary Russell, which is pretty cool and interesting
They're
also.
like just like they're all George Foreman, right?
Yeah, same exact thing. But I do think that this was an interesting fight to put Gary in off of the layoff. And I know Puello had a layoff also, but Puello was slept on a lot in this build-up too. We talked about this before, but the fact that I know Puello lost his title because he tested positive for like a fertility drug or something like that, but the dude was always a good fighter. I mean, just his win against Batirak Madoff. Anybody who can beat Batirak Madoff is a certified fighter. He's got split decision losses against everybody and their mother out there. But if you're able to beat a guy like that, I think it shows class. And I think we just saw that. The bottom line for me is I think it was Gary's first time he's fought a southpaw as a pro. It was the first time that Gary fought a southpaw as a pro, and Puello has fought a bunch of southpaws already, and I think that's kind of what we saw in there, where the same things Gary was able to do against orthodox guys with his pressure didn't work as much, and Puello was able to just catch and shoot and counter, just time him up a lot in this one also. But still a real close fight. I thought it was a 1 point win for Puello. I think you can argue Gary winning. No way in hell was it 118, 109 for Gary. I love Gary. I was hoping he would win the fight, but I just think that's nonsense. But
That was a
good win for
wild score, bro.
yeah, good win for Puello, and I want to see Gary back in the ring soon now too. I want to see both those guys, as we mentioned. There's about fucking 20 guys at 140. I'd like to see either of them in with. So just another example of 140 being the deepest division I think we got right now in the sport for a talent pool.
Listen, the problem with the Russell boys is they have the utmost of confidence and the utmost of skill, and they're not active. And so, if a big fight comes their way, none of them are the kind of guys to say no to it. They're all real fighters. They always show up, but they fight every year, every 18 months. It's sort of an occasion when we get a Gary Russell fight of any kind, right? Ultimately, when you get up to a certain level, there's just going to be times where that's not enough. You have to maintain a certain level of activity, to consistently deliver the same types of performances. And I think this was just another example of that, unfortunately, because they are all really fun fighters and talented and guys that I enjoy watching. But it is sort of a frustrating thing to watch a talented guy who's just like can't entirely pull the trigger, the way that they can at their best. So again, I think Puello is right in the mix of one of the deepest divisions in boxing, and I think that Gary, while he has to go to the back of the line, it's not the end of the road either. I think the lesson is just get back in there as soon as you can against the best guy you can.
100%. I see Adam Hurley saying that he's thinking about Gary and Subaru. I'd love to see that fight right now. I even got a fight for
Yeah, fight.
Puello. I got a fight for Puello too. Is that because I've always thought Gary matched up well against Matias in that fight too. But I think both guys coming off losses would be a great fight to see. Kind of who sticks around as like the guy who would kind of need to rebuild himself a little bit. But got tell you what, the fight that I'd love to see for Puello would be him and Isaac Cruz. I know that he's the interim champ for the WBC and Cruz the WBA, but all those things aside, I think that that would be a perfect style matchup to see. How does Cruz deal with the guy in Puello who's a tall, long southpaw who's got boxing skills and showed in this fight that he made Gary kind of fight his fight. And Isaac Cruz a different style. It's an orthodox guy who's a little more reckless coming forward with maybe not as much pound for pound skill as Gary, but he's effective in his way and what he does. So would Puello be able to offset that, and would Cruz be able to overwhelm him? I think would be a real interesting one to see.
Yeah, I think. Listen, there's a lot of options open for all these guys. Another one I'd like to see is why not have Puello finally actually get the fight with Ishmael Barroso, who's coming off a pretty electrifying first round knockout. And even though he's a little older, he does seem to be a little bit of a spoiler. And if not for Tony Weeks, may have spoiled Rolly's next couple of fights as well. You know, but that's the beauty of this weight class, bro. They're 20 guys deep. Any one of them could win a title at any time. I think we're in an era where you're going to see titles get passed around, and that's how you know you're in a good era.
Yeah, shout out to Barroso too, because that dude, I always try to give him credit, but you almost kind of do forget about him too, because even the Davies win, you haven't heard about him since. But shout out to that dude too, because the guy who's been through a lot of shit in his career too, both inside of the ring and outside of the ring. So man, it's just cool to see a guy like that. And I just pray that he's. They were saying, oh yeah, no, he'll get another shot, but boxing ain't always the fairest game we got out here. So I would like to see him get a shot eventually, even if I'm not sure he's gonna win the fight they're putting him in with. Shoot, that power can always kind of bail him out. So it'll be interesting to see how anybody still deals with him at this point. And he's more than a live dog in there.
All right, we'll keep it real fucking brief on this segment, but Carlos Adames gets a pretty weird decision over Terrell Gausha, where not that much seems to happen. Gausha, in my mind, seemed to edge a lot of the later rounds and probably edge the fight. We have wide scorecards in favor of Adames. What did you make of this? This was a messy one.
I'm happy you said that though too, because I'm looking to pull up my scorecard. But I had it all as basically to flip a coin fight. Let me see. I gave Goucher, oh shit, a lot of these late rounds.
Yeah, I mean,
I
he
had,
felt like he pulled away at the end.
yeah. I had it 5-0 Adames, but then after that I had it 7-5, so I had it 5-2 Goucher in the last 7 rounds. So I had him winning most of the rounds later on. But I want to give Terrell Goucher credit because he's gonna be one of those guys who looks like probably never wins a title. But I mean, he's just one of those dudes who, with circumstances of everything, and if he had gotten an easier opportunity for a title, this dude could have been a champion a couple times over already. So he's always been competitive in these fights, and I don't know. I wish that one of the judges had got to. I mean, maybe not. It wasn't the most entertaining fight, but I wish the judges had still gotten to watch it so we could have got an accurate reflection of it. But I had Adama's edge in it, but I mean, 119, 109, 118, 110. Come on, man. I don't even really know what to say
Goofy,
about that.
goofy. Those are
Hmm.
goofy scores right there. Oh, look who we got here.
Hmm.
Also on double duty. How we doing, Bob?
How we doing? I like the Dakota. Looks like he got a good tan. What
I
have you
got a
been?
little bronze going, don't I?
Yeah, like what have you been doing? Begging people for money outside of their job?
Yeah, bro. I actually,
Yeah.
I'm actually working outside. I'm getting my sunlight every day. You know what I mean? I'm getting a little vitamin D in my life. Ain't nothing wrong with
Okay,
that.
I like that. I like that. I like seeing the legend Jack Kelly. Looking like a middle linebacker, thick shoulders. Love to see that.
What's up, big dog? Good to see you.
I'm bringing the mass hole energy, but from the West Coast. That's what I'd
Let's
like to think I'm doing.
I'm
There we
seeing
go.
Adam Hurley has got a couple of different comments going about this fight. Let's just get right into this one real quick. Probably the most shocking outcome of the weekend is Leon Paro beating Subriel Matias. Lukey, I even asked you last night because you were on coverage. I said, how'd it go? And you were like, bro, if you can, just go watch it. And it was, I think one of the things that people are not talking about is it was just like a pretty fantastic fight, super entertaining, gutsy, grueling performance from both guys. But initial reactions to how exactly we got to this result.
Why is
I mean,
everybody waiting on me? This ain't my show.
Yeah, no, Jack, we're
I'll
waiting.
go first. Yeah, but so I watched a little bit of it last night, but I wanted to wait and then rewatch the whole fight. So I had already seen the result by the time I had seen the fight. But shocking, but also kind of not shocking at the same time. I've always thought Matias was good, but I always thought if someone kind of was able to preserve their energy and just kind of extend. A lot easier said than done, but kind of do what some of these guys have done in the early rounds, but not exert a ton of energy and just slowly boxed, I thought there was a path to victory against Matias, and I think that's exactly what Paro did. He kind of took what Matias gave him early, and he didn't empty the clip like we've seen Ponce and Ergashev and some of these other guys do. And I don't even think Matias. A lot of talk about Matias being exposed. I don't think he was exposed. I just think that we all saw the path to victory possible to beat him, and I just think that we saw a guy who had the skills in the boxing ability, but also the discipline when you're in there to be able to box like that for 12 rounds against a guy like Matias, and I thought it was a hell of a performance.
I'm still trying to figure out the balance on being super impressed by Liam Paro's performance and also trying to measure sort of like how much of an off night did Matias have, or are we seeing something new about him? I will be honest.
Bro, talk about the rapper. Talk about the rapper. He did like a full on waiting for the rapper to do his verse and then passionately rapped his song. Come on, man.
It is kind of a bad omen when you've been sort of like this silent killer to become, more of a performative type of guy. And there's a lot of talk about, he's on FaceTime with Regis. He's talking to this guy. Who are you going to fight next? I'm new at Matchroom. And nobody's really bringing up Liam Paro, and that's a real guy. It did feel like there was maybe an overlooking or a lack of focus, or just, he wasn't fully invested in this as a fight.
Man, if that's the case, then shame on him because he was the rightful favorite, but Liam Paro ain't never been a joke either. I mean, I remember so I had heard things about him, but when I saw him knock out Brock Jarvis in the first round in a 50-50 fight, I knew, okay, like, this guy just showed me a little bit of something here. I had the Montana Love fight, and we all saw what he did to Montana Love in that fight. So I think that no matter what you think about Montana Love, he does have real skills. So to see Paro do that to him, I think was impressive. And one thing I thought was interesting too, just even for Paro, before I say this, was just he looked real sharp and he did a good job of moving but not over moving also. Some people might not understand what that means, but when you're in the ring as a boxer and you're fighting the guy who's going forward, you want to be able to move around but not over move enough where you're constantly putting yourself on the ropes, where you're constantly kind of gassing yourself out. And I think he did a good job of, like I said, taking what Matias gave him but leaving enough in the tank that whenever Matias tried and had an onslaught, I think Paro always responded well to each little bit of resistance he was given. I thought he used that right hook to kind of turn Matias a lot too. He'd kind of throw it and then he'd kind of circle out that way also. Matias has always been dangerous, but Matias is dangerous, and like you see with a lot of these punchers, he's got to have his feet set to be able to throw. He's got to be planted. But I think that Paro did a good job of shooting and then shooting that right hook and then moving around, and then each time he did that, Matias was forced to reset, and then Paro would always then be first on the draw after that.
And Paro was also the best defensive fighter that Matias has been in probably up to this point. So I'm sure I don't think he's done that much, as much missing as he did in this fight. So that's probably a new experience for Matias. I also think if there's any sort of like style flaw that Paro uncovered, I think that Matias has a little bit of that you go, I go, right? Like he's not going to punch with you. He's going to wait till you're done with your volley. And even if you're not throwing hard, if you're just touch, he's not going to throw until you're done. And I think once Paro kind of figured that out, or maybe that was an observation he made before the fight, it just seemed like he was able to exploit that.
One thing I want to bring up too that obviously Luke, you were there, so you might not have noticed it. You watched it on the broadcast, Dakota, so I'm guessing you saw it. But I think it was the seventh round or whatever. They talked to Matias's corner, and they just seemed real comfortable with how the fight was going. Basically saying, yeah, like he's gonna eventually kind of wear him down. And I thought it's a troubling habit to kind of get into. Of yeah, it's always worked, but it's one of those things like we say with other fighters is, well, if it doesn't eventually work, then what's your next adjustment going to kind of be? And I think that's the thing they lacked in this fight is they just thought that okay, like it's going to be like all these other fights. Yeah, Paro's going to start out good, but eventually we're going to get to him and he's going to crumble. And when he didn't crumble, when Paro kept forcing Matias to reset and kept not being able to play on his feet, they just kind of lacked that next adjustment and was just thinking that Paro was going to bail them out at some point.
Can we talk about my guy Joshua Cabrera down there talking about El Cabron? I don't speak Spanish, so I don't know what that means, but I'm sure that's probably something pretty cool. It says #1 contender July 7th, implying that Gervonta Cabrera is going to beat William Zepeda.
Love that fight. Shout out our Josh.
Love that fight, bro.
Yeah, shout out Josh Cabrera and shout out Gio Cabrera too. I know when he fought Isaac Cruz in a very, very close fight, that they could have gone either way back then too. And we've seen what Isaac Cruz has done since then, and Cruz has gotten a lot of credit now after that fight, but people kind of forget the problems that Gio gave him in that fight. And I'm excited to see how Cepeda deals with a guy like Gio. He's always been a tricky guy, and for a guy who doesn't have a ton of knockouts, I think he hits much harder than people anticipate that look at his record too. So if Cepeda's thinking shit's going to be sweet in there, he better be careful because I know Gio is going to be coming to fight for sure.
Yeah, I just want to say, like, with the Subriel Matias fight, I mean, everyone knows it's my day off, so Lukey's drinking the soda pops and he's chilling, and I'm about to lift 1,000,000 pounds bench press.
Love that for you, bro.
Thank you, bro. You know, I'm trying to be like a real middle-aged man. Do you like the vibe on me? I like that vibe on me too. I hope I don't sound, but Matisse just really looked like a guy that was like looking for the next fight. You know, it looked like he was like, man, this is going to be so cool. I'm going to knock this guy out. There's like 5 hot chicks in the crowd. I know they're going to be pumped. I'm going to do a sick after party. Looked like he was focused on everything but Liam Paro. And Liam Paro was the guy that didn't get the memo that he was supposed to go down with the first punch. And what I saw with him for a boogeyman fighter, he really didn't really have that gear to be the boogeyman. It's like when someone was not compliant with his plan of how things were supposed to go, he was kind of like, oh, well, I'll just keep doing the same thing and eventually he'll tip over. And it really made him look very basic.
I think the other thing, too, is we talk about that false sense of confidence in the corner. Here's the main difference, right? Tank has been proven to be that guy who can lose some rounds and get a knockout. And Calvin Ford is getting serious with him like, yo, we need all these rounds, right? And that's at the top of the game. Subriel Matias might still have some of that same knockout confidence, but the difference is the corner had a sense of urgency around Tank's performance, and this corner didn't necessarily. And I don't know if it's because they thought the knockout was coming. I don't know if it's because they thought they were winning. Listen, I thought it was close. I thought it was a 1 to 3 point fight either way. So I do think it was a close fight, but all the more reason to insist that he put his foot on the gas when you know it's a close fight.
The difference with that too is I think that even when Tank starts slow, you can kind of see what the vision and the plan is. Like he's setting shit up. I think even when he's in there, so you can see by the 4th round he was ready to kind of take over.
This fucking guy having an absolute seizure live on air.
But yeah, but I think that's the difference between Tank and Matias, where Tank is in those rounds, he's the downloading the data, as people hate to hear, but guys do it, and he starts setting shit up. Where Matias, he's not really setting shit up. I think he's just waiting for, as you said, he's kind of okay. I'm gonna let this guy go, and then I'm gonna go eventually. It's not okay. He's doing this, so I'm gonna counter with this. It's just okay. He's doing his thing, and then I'm gonna do my thing. So that's the difference between those guys. Is you can kind of see what Tank's doing in there when he's giving up rounds, even if he shouldn't be doing that against the highest guys. I think there's still a method to his madness. Crawford, Canelo, all those guys do it. So the great ones have the ability to do that. I just still don't think Matias is able to then dissect it in the moment like Tank does and then put the certain punches together he needs. And for him, it's just like, okay, now I'm going to just do my thing. And Nibs has a great comment there also about the corners being underrated. Some of the most important parts, even with Paro's corner, kept saying to him, even when Paro was boxing well, it'd be easy for the corner to say, oh yeah, you're doing great, and just kind of just say that and hype him up. But they always said, okay, you're doing great, but you better stick to this damn game plan because he's coming with the heat. This is it's in his home crowd. I mean, I'm sure we can get into the referee after also, but that was just fucking terrible. Not the best night of the office for Luis Pabon too, but I think Paro's corner gets a lot of credit where Matias' corner might have fumbled the bag a little bit. Paro's credit took in full advantage of it and saying, okay, we're doing good, but we got to stay just as locked in round 12 as we were at the beginning of the fight, and it ended up paying off for him.
And by the way, Paro did get rocked and hurt multiple times in the middle rounds of this fight. So there was moments where he did need that motivation. That's what he got from his corner. I think the questions around Matias were like, is he also like that where there's method to the madness? Is it the same level of calculator that somebody like Tank is? And I think the answer now we know is no, right? The power isn't enough to bail him out at a certain level. And I think even doing some real, not basic, but some very fundamental boxing stuff, Paro was able to really, mute this guy's offense, who's been a killer. I think put 135 and 140 together. I mean, I think the modern lightweight has gotten a lot bigger, so it's not a bad idea. But I think there is a reason that those are separate weight classes too.
Yeah, I think you can still see the gap sometimes between when a guy moves from 35 up to 40. I think you see a lot of welterweights still coming down to make 140, and I think there is still a difference in between. Kind of like when you see even with David's off from 68 to 75. I think that's the gap up. 35 is like the biggest weight class for the little guys, and I think 40 to 68 are kind of the mid-tier weights.
Yeah.
And 68 to then 75 is a jump to, okay, you're not fighting the big guy. So I think it's kind of the same thing with 35.
I want to go
40,
back to this too, because the 140-pound division severely changed yesterday with Gary Antoine and Matias losing. This weight class is going through changes all the time, guys.
That's what makes it a great weight class too, just like 54.
Yeah, Devin Haney dominates Regis Prograis in his first time at that weight. That seemed like a 50-50 fight. Then Ryan upsets Haney. Catterall wins the rematch against Josh Taylor. Teofimo dominates Taylor, then looks iffy. There's just multiple guys, there's multiple championships that just feel like they're up for grabs for anybody at this weight right now because there's so much talent.
I'll ask Lukey this question because I know he was reporting for Boxing Scene, or he was probably talking with some people. But no, I'll leave it open to anybody. But I want to hear what you got to say. I don't know. What was your thought on the way the fight was going with Paro and Matias? Because I think for me, we can get into the point deduction after, which was clearly bullshit. But after the 7th round, I had the fight even. I think I had it 66-66, and then I had Paro sweeping the rest of the fight, him winning 116-111. So were people looking at it as like Matias was kind of turning it on in those middle rounds, and Paro then kind of got it going again? And what were your thoughts as you were kind of watching the middle rounds?
Yeah, and how the fight went on? I remember having that youthful energy of scoring fights. Now I'm like burnout, and I don't score fights. I'd say I feel fights. So I feel how a fight's going, but I'm not sitting there with like a tracker and being like, okay, this 10-9. Felt like Paro was comfortably winning the first half of the fight. Then it felt like he was on his way to getting stopped. And then it felt like he got a second wind and then went back to like outboxing Matias. And it felt like he comfortably won the fight. Felt to me like maybe Matias won 3 rounds, maybe 4 rounds. But given that I don't trust the Puerto Rican Commission for whatever it is, 3-4 rounds winning in someone's hometown, and this is not a transparent sport, I was not super comfortable at what the outcome was because I felt like Matias did better than Danny Garcia did against Mauricio Herrera, and Danny Garcia beat Mauricio Herrera. So I was very nervous about the outcome of the fight.
I think that's understandable. I mean, I'm maybe one of the only people. I thought that this was legitimately like a close fight, and so I wouldn't have even called it a robbery had Matias gotten the decision, to be honest. Maybe I got to go back and rewatch it with less of like the heat of the moment, but it felt like a close fight that, considering how Pabon was treating Paro the whole fight, considering how the reception to Matias, it just felt like they're just going to give this to him. That's what makes sense. And I'm glad they didn't, because I do think that Paro edged it. But I did think it was legitimately close.
Hey, bro, could we get into Pabon real quick? We don't have to spend much time on it. I don't know if you guys
let's
just
disparage
earlier,
you.
Like,
let's make fun of your nose, bro.
Bro, that was just crazy.
Bro.
Like, just crazy. I mean, you go into, I know it's in Puerto Rico, but it first starts in the 2nd round, which Pabon is saying that,
me, bro.
Yeah, he's saying you're not respecting me. It's like, first of all, he wasn't even really leading with his head or anything like that, but just the fact that he's going into, instead of saying like, all he could have said was, okay, like just watch the leading with the head. It's the 2nd round. That's all you had to say. To get into in the dressing room, I said you got to respect me, this and that. Like, that was way too overboard, and the point deduction makes it that much worse. Thank the Lord that the deduction didn't have like an impact on the fight, because we could have seen a fight that a point deduction can clearly impact the fight too. So I just wanted to. I don't like talking about referees and judging and stuff like that, but when it's shitty, I think we got to call it out for that. I think that Pabon just the moment it seemed
He
like
sucks,
the moment
Jack.
was
He
too yeah the
sucks.
moment was too much for him, and he made it. I think more Sergio. I think like one of the guys said on the broadcast, which was good, but he said there's 10,000 people in here and 1,000 people watching, and none of them tuned in for you. And I think that was the perfect way to sum it up. And I just thought that he was being unfair from the beginning, and I thought the point deduction was bad, but I've never heard a ref talk in that way. Saying, "Oh, you said you were going to respect me, this and that," in the second round when ain't nothing that really happened at that point. So I just had to get that off my chest because that aggravated me. I didn't even see it live, so I knew that something had kind of gone on, but man, that was just annoying as hell to see.
And it had the feel of the kind of fight where that point deduction could be a difference. You know what I mean? Like the judges all have it 6-6, and so boom, there Matias, escapes with his title, and we could still talk about what big fights are next for him and what kind of adjustments he's going to have to make. And fortunately, that's not how it played out.
I
But
love that comment by Adam Hurley
referee.
too. Real quick about just, I love that comment Adam Hurley said just before it goes away, but I would love Lemos and Ponce. Ponce is a dude who I want to see get right back in the mix too. We talk about these guys taking losses and being able to come back, but that dude showed a lot for me even in that Matias fight. Yeah, he emptied the clip early and kind of gassed up. But same thing as Ergashev. Like, I still want to see all these dudes back. Gary Antoine Russell just lost. Shit, Matias just lost, but keep recycling these guys at 140. We're gonna
And
keep seeing
Gustavo
fantastic
Lemos is
fights,
a
and
monster.
and his fight is, you can even argue if he should have lost that fight. So I'm definitely not against those guys, especially Lemos getting another opportunity. That's for sure.
I mean, look, Luis Pabon has had a history of being a shitty referee. Sorry for cussing. And this is just like another instance amongst really bad things. And we're the keep it real police. It looked like blatant favoritism.
Yeah, it really was an example of that. It felt like he was all over Paro for every sort of perceived infraction on his part. I don't know that he even looked at Subriel Matias for the entire fight. I don't think, and if he wanted to be nitpicky,
Dakota, he's leading with his forearms, bro. You can't throw a jab with your elbow and your forearms. And this guy's like not saying, hey, buddy.
hey, and listen, when they're on the inside and they're both clinching, Paro's getting all the warnings. When they both sort of lean in with their heads, Paro's the only one getting the warning. It was just he had this real insistence on being just way too fucking involved in the fight, in a fight that he really didn't need to be. I don't even think it was a dirty fight overall if you're comparing it to other fights.
No, and hey, at the end of the day, I think that's what makes the win that much sweeter for Paro. And it's
Yeah.
a good thing to see boxing get it right in a fight like this. Like I said, they had every reason to end up screwing him over and giving Matias a win, but that's what I like to see is when they actually, for all the flaws that our game does have, it is good to see when the referee looked like was against him. The crowd was obviously against him, just and rightfully so because Matias is their due, but the judges watched the fight that we watched, and I think that's what I'm happy to see still at the end of the day because whether or not we thought Power won, if he gets screwed over, that fucks up his future money, that fucks up opportunities, all these kind of things. Even when a guy gets robbed, it's easy to say, yeah, well, we know this guy beat that guy. It's like, yeah, we might know, but people who just look up the box rec won't know, and it's going to end up changing his money and his opportunities going forward. So I'm happy they got it right.
Jack, we got a hell of a comment section today. We got a slower weekend of boxing next weekend. Anything stand out to you next weekend?
I think we all know one fight that stands out to me, but I know we got the top ranked card. I don't think there's any other cards, but I love two fights on that card. I know we got Espinoza in the main event, the guy who just beat Robesi. I wish that I thought we were going to see them run it back, so I'm a little confused that maybe they're doing that later on this year, but y'all know me. There's two fights I like on this card. I got my guy Abraham Nova, who's been in Vegas for about a week now, so he's there, locked and loaded, ready to go against Andres Cortez, and a matchup that I love too, because we got to see Cortez live in person. I thought he had his career best performance there, and I think that's one of those. I think what people would refer to as a 50-50 fight. I think the term gets overused sometimes, but I think Abraham's experience, and I think just that he's got a little more tools in his toolbox, but I don't want to sleep on Cortez, and just because I want to give, if Abraham is to win, I want to make sure he gets the credit he deserves for fighting a guy like Cortez. Abraham coming off a loss, just like he did against Adam Lopez, is showing just that he's willing to come back in and fight these tough fights. So I love that fight, and I also love the fight between Troy Isley and Javier Martinez. I think that it's the kind of fight where if it's a levels kind of fight, the loser does not go. This is what I hate sometimes about these fights. If somebody loses, let's say Javier Martinez loses a competitive decision to Troy Isley, yeah, it means Isley moves up and becomes a contender, but it means Javier Martinez, he doesn't go down. His stock stays the same, and his stock can go up even in a loss. So that's why I love those kind of fights where the winner becomes a contender and the loser is still one hell of a fighter. So I'm really interested for those two fights. Not the biggest casual appeal kind of fights, but two fantastic 50-50 fights that I'm more than excited for on Friday.
Jack, I know you're going to go with Nova, of course, but do you have any insight to how he's responding or how, he's been handling the fight with Shock Foster?
Yeah, he's handling it pretty well now. And I can say this now, but I know just being in the locker room after the fight, I know he was definitely, just like anyone would be, kind of down on himself and knowing, okay, if I had not gotten dropped and a few other punches and a few rounds go a different way, I could have had a world title. So in the moment, I think everyone would be crushed just knowing that it was a split decision and they came close to winning a world title. But I mean, right after that next week, I think he was back working out again, and he is just the kind of guy that his spirit kind of can show you a lot about the space that he's in. I think we saw from all the work that I had done before the fight, just being around him off camera, that he was in great spirits going into the Foster fight. I think he fought like that. And I think he's in the same kind of space of mind right now. I think he's got a very clear mind. And him and Cortez have had a history going back and forth. I know Cortez has kind of talked a lot. And knowing Abraham, I know he's not one to, if someone's going to start a little war of words, he's never one to kind of back down. So I think it should lead to an entertaining build up this week. And I also think that it gives him motivation to come in and at the best visibility because he knows, also that Cortez, and I know the Cortez is a legit fighter. This is not a give me by any means, so I want to give him credit for taking the fight and credit for Cortez for making this hell of a fight.
It is a great matchup. The truth is, it should probably be the main event on this card. No disrespect to Espinoza. I think he might be the best featherweight out, but it's not a compelling enough matchup. This is a really compelling matchup that has like legitimate stakes at 130 pounds. And for Troy versus for Martinez, listen, this is the future of middleweight. And after a fight like Gausha and the Dames, where it's like the present of middleweight is just not happening, these are the kinds of matchups I'm excited about at 160. Is Isley versus Martinez, is Hamza Shiraz and Ammo Williams. Hamza Shiraz is a fucking monster. These are the kinds of fights that I think are going to make what was once a super popular, famous division a little more interesting.
Yeah, I mean, shoot, no one tagged me in general, but I'll just say stuff just to say stuff. Andres Cortez talks a lot. He told me that he was going to stop Abraham Nova in 4 rounds. He told me to ask him what punch I wanted him to knock him out with. I told him a left hook. He said he'd do it. I mean, he talks, and I like both guys, but he talks a lot. And you kind of hit the nail on the head, Jack. Abraham's not a real good talk fighter, but he's a good fist fighter. So it's going to be interesting because Andreas is building a foundation that he has to live up to. And Abraham is not a rinky-dink fighter. He's a real guy. And I'm kind of curious how a lot of that pressure that Andreas puts on himself through talk and how that manifests in this fight.
And I also think just the fact that Abraham has been in a lot of these tough fights already, so I think he's coming in expecting to win. Obviously, he's got confidence, but he's coming in expecting a tough fight too. He's been in the fight with Adam Lopez. He was just in the fight with Oshaki Foster. So I think that's where Cortez's confidence could kind of be a detriment at a point where if he gets in there in the mid rounds and he's in a tough physical fight, that's a close fight. Is he thinking in the back of his mind, like, man, I thought I was going to have this dude out of here by now, this and that, all these kind of things where Abraham is probably coming in expecting to win, but knowing what it takes to be in a tough fight. I think that could end up being the difference in this one. So
I think we'll go with this as a sort of as a last topic for this show. But can you imagine Undisputed at 140? I think the beauty of 140 right now is the answer is no. I think a lot of titles are going to be changing hands. I think it's just a big open class where it really is pretty unclear who the best guy is. If I had to pick anybody to be that guy somewhere down the road, it feels like it might still be Dev, but I don't fucking know, dude. Shit is changing so quickly in this weight class, and it's fun to watch. And the truth is, that's how it should be.
That's why it's my favorite weight class.
All right, boys. Is there any last points we want to make? Anybody we want to shout out? I mean, I'll shout out the chat again. Thank you for fucking chiming in.
Boxing's pretty boring right now, to be honest with you. I mean, like, if we're gonna be real, like, we got a couple of hardcore enthusiast weeks. Yep. But we're kind of really waiting for. I mean, let me pull it up. Like, what are we waiting for? We're waiting for kind of. Oh, you guys know.
Well, I would say just off the top of my head, we're waiting for, I think, would be Estrada and Bam. Then after that, it's probably the August 3rd card, if we're really looking at it. I mean, Boots and Avanesian, yep. I kind of like that. I love to see Boots, but as far as major events, it's Estrada and Bam, which the casuals won't be too interested in. But after that, I think it's probably that August 3rd card that Crawford's in.
Which I think is also an underrated fight, by the way. I don't think that's a bad fight by any means.
No, but I mean, I think that, we're excited for Estrada and Bam. That's a great fight, but probably 80% of boxing fans are not going to be watching it live just from sizeism. So really, like, the whole rest of this month in July, fight fans are kind of punting on it unless someone goes on Instagram and kisses a guy's girlfriend or socks a guy at a press conference or says something disrespectful on Twitter. The in-ring action isn't going to match, like, the nonsense of Ryan Garcia saying something. So we're kind of waiting for August 3rd. And hopefully some of these fights deliver. I'll watch most of them. But, we're kind of in that hardcore enthusiast. What do they call it in baseball? The dog days of summer. Mm-hmm. We're kind of in those with boxing. We're not getting the – man, there's my guy.
Yeah.
So.
And I think for pugilists, I think not that we're saying it's because for us, there's still some of these fights that we like. And I think overall, just saying pugilists, I think the sport overall right now is in a great place. I just think that he's saying at this little moment coming up these next few weeks of another fight that I still really like is I like the fight Oshaki Foster and Conceição. I've always thought that obviously Conceição is a great fighter, so I'm interested to see how that one plays out too. So I think that, as these guys are saying in here, this year's been great. I think we've seen a lot of great fights. I think just that he's saying that this upcoming stretch for the casual fan isn't as appealing as some of these other fights. But as Jeff from Bourbon and Boxing is saying too, it's just that we've had a lit bunch of fights recently, so it's going to slow down a little bit, as it tends to do normally in the sport in the summer.
So I think what I'm trying to say is we're lacking the big name boxers taking the big name fights that get us that, whoa, here's the tentpole event and there's 3 weeks of kind of interesting hardcore fights. Like a fight like Raymond Muratalla versus Tevin Farmer. I'm very excited about that fight. I'm looking at the calendar. Juto Nakatani versus Vincent Astrolabio. That's a great fight, but we don't really have that star power until we get to August 3rd. And I mean, that's just a fact. From a numbers game, you want kind of these big stars. And the sad thing is, like, Shakur is returning, but he's returning against a guy that I don't think a lot of fight fans are excited for. So it's not going to change the numbers. But, I wouldn't say boxing is boring. Boxing is always entertaining. It basically runs my life. But some of these matchups right now, I'd say, are very predictable in the outcomes.
And I'll be honest, too. I think boxing has too many paywalls in front of it right now. I think when we get the fights that we want, there's a hefty price tag attached to it. And there's rarely big, meaningful fights that our subscriptions just sort of entail. And I think that is worthy of noting. And I think if there is any criticism of what boxing is doing right now, is it's putting every meaningful fight behind multiple paywalls, which I think deters growing the sport.
But even the last thing to go off that last point too is that even Joshua Cabrera too. I didn't notice this, but this is the one thing that always aggravates all of us with the boxing is that the Shakur card is a pretty decent card, and it sucks that we have all these kind of slow weeks. A few weeks that we might not even have any boxing on, but then you're gonna put the Shakur card against the Gio and William Zepeda fight. Two fights that I mean at that point I'll probably be paying more. Not probably I'll be paying more attention to William Zepeda and Gio Cabrera because I'm more interested to see how that fight plays out. But it's just the classic boxing thing is we'll have a few dry weeks and then yeah we'll put two cards then on the same night instead of putting one of them in any of the weeks kind of before that. But even the last thing I want to say is going off the point you guys were saying is that even Top Rank right now, as they do give us some good free shows, but they're just not utilizing the stars in the way that we want them to. And Luki talked about stars, and we obviously love the sport, but the sport for the casuals only goes as far as it does with the stars. So Top Rank's got two of their young stars in Shakur and Tiafimo fighting, but when you have Shakur fighting against Artem and you have Tiafimo fighting against Steve Claggett, those aren't, as you're saying, the kind of fights to push the needle. And hopefully those guys get bigger fights after this, and I'm sure that they will. But those are the kind of fights where it's like we're interested in those guys, but maybe not in these kind of specific fights right now.
Can I
And
push
we're seeing a
back
lot of
on
that,
the
I think.
Steve Blaggett fight because
Because I love
I
that.
think
That's fair.
I think that fight is a real trap fight for Tio. I think that's a fight that they should have declined because Steve's on a real run. He's a high volume puncher, and he doesn't show that he gets hurt in recent memory, and his record's terrible. So, like, it's hard to get motivated to train for this guy. He's probably the best version of a fighter as he's been, and he throws a lot of punches. This is the type of guy you avoid if you're Teofimo Lopez, in my opinion, because he's the best version of himself with a lot of losses.
Yeah, and I think that that fight it will end up being pretty interesting. So I think that I can't refute any of those points. I think that it's not I think my point was it's more not the event that we kind of want to see Tiafimo in. Because as you said, most people are going to they might say, oh, Steve Claggett, let me Google him. Oh, the dude's got 7 losses. Who gives a fuck about him? So I think you're going to see more of that than you will guys who have seen these fights, seen what he did to Machado, seen what he's done in some of these wins recently, in the streak that he's kind of on. Because, I mean, shoot, I love me some Steve Claggett. I got no problem with him and I just like to see him get the opportunity to kind of showcase what he's got. But I just think that that's, as I said, it's not going to move the needle per se, and it's not going to get the credit that he does deserve because that dude comes to fight, and I'm hoping that he does give Tiafimo some good work.
Hell yeah. Well, see, sometimes we're out here changing minds, right? Luke, you just sold me on the Claggett fight.
But I mean, it's like Claggett's like a hard luck fighter who a lot of his losses aren't really losses. You know, they're weird, and I guess it's also because like I watch Eye of the Tiger fights. Typically, he's like a staple of that. I've seen his development, but like that's a fight, right? Teofimo Lopez, $1 million fighter. I wouldn't want to put him in with a guy that I know is going to throw 100 punches around and might not get hurt.
Yeah, it's
especially
a riskier fight than it looks for sure.
Especially in a guy in Teofimo who's shown that he can fight up and down to level of competition too. Well, yeah, he looked great against Josh Taylor. We don't know what Taylor had left. He looked great against Lomachenko, but we've seen what he's looked like against Kambosos, against Sandor Martin, against Jermaine Ortiz recently too. So when he's not, he said himself too that I can't get up for these stay busy fights as I do for the big fights. So be careful because you might fuck around and find out against the guy, as you said, with the motor of Steve Claggett. I still think the counterpunching of Tio can give him issues, but if he's not locked on in all the way and he can't hurt Claggett, man, that could be one hell of a fight.
Is this Tio's last fight with Top Rank?
I don't know what his promotional situation, but for me, it is a little bit Tio's last chance to be like, I'm that guy. Because if he has a shaky performance in this fight, at least for me, it doesn't mean you're a bad fighter. It just means you're not that guy.
So to me, just looking at it from the business side, this screams you're coming to the end of your contract, and here's a really risky fight with a guy on paper that looks really bad, but he's way harder than his record looks, and you're probably not going to look good against him.
Yeah, I don't know the situation, but I mean, what you said, it makes me think that it probably is his last fight at this point because when you add up all the dots.
And this is another great point. Honestly, every fight can't be the biggest fight of your career. That's true too, man. You can't have a super fight. And regardless of what you think of, if Tio's gotten, decisions favorably or not, it's tough to question, the level of opposition he's hopping in with pretty consistently.
Yeah, I mean, look, there's always going to be good fights. I think the thing is, like last year, we got Spence Crawford. We had that right in the middle of summer. So we were very like, that was our summer, July 29th, Spence Crawford. We're there. This summer, it was, I guess, Jake Paul versus Mike Tyson. But now,
Usyk Fury.
yeah, but that's not the summer. Like the month of July is going to kind of be like, okay, A side, B side fights. And then in August, we get a big card the first week. And I mean, I guess that's where I'm kind of going from.
Well, listen, you're not wrong, bro. Any final points, fellas? It's been a hell of a show.
Yeah, one thing that I want to say, I actually saved it right up here, but shout out to Boog Williams, my guy on Twitter, ITR Boxing. I know it's his YouTube channel too, but he had a tweet that I want to share right here because anytime we see a guy lose, and we're always like this too, but that losses aren't always the end of the world. So I just want to and you always see when a guy loses, oh, this guy got exposed, this and that. Even what I was saying, I don't think Matias got exposed. I just think we've always seen a path to victory. We just found someone who was able to do that and have the discipline for it. But his tweet said the favorites that lost last night didn't get exposed. The exposure came from their opponents who put the work in camp and displayed it in the ring. And I think that's a perfect way to sum these things up. And just because a guy loses doesn't mean they're exposed. God forbid the B-side guy can rise to the occasion and show up and have a great win. So I think that in these kind of upsets, it's easy to say, oh, this guy didn't do this. But it's, no, the other guy just didn't follow the script. And he came and he changed his life with a great performance.
I couldn't agree more, Jack. Hell of a show, fellas. Always a pleasure. Thank you to everybody in the chat for tuning into the random ITR Boxing Sunday show that replaced Catch and Counter for the week. And we'll catch you sometime this week.
I'd appreciate all y'all.